Big game in the SEC this weekend in Oxford, Ole Miss versus Georgia. Joe, we were kind of talking about this in the preview of this, so we're going to probably rehash this so we can clip it and get it up and all that. Your thoughts on this game?
Look, I understand a lot of people that would be quick to be worried about Georgia stepping into this matchup. I understand that a lot of people would be feeling that Ole Miss going into that game on the road after they played the way that they did against Florida. But I'm not worried. I'm not worried about Georgia because of the way that they've played against bad opponents, the way that they've stepped up to the plate against their bigger opponents on the schedule, the way that they finished in the second half against Alabama. This Georgia team, like we've spent weeks saying, is still worthy of being the favorite for the national championship. Yes, Carson Beck needs to play cleaner, but they still, and I turn to that being an issue for Mike Bobo more than it is an issue for Carson Beck. He has a very difficult challenge, though, Blake. He's going up against the best defensive line in the country, which so far this season, this elite group led by J.J. Pegues, Walter Nolan, Jared Ivey, Princely Umami-Ellen, they've got 41 freaking sacks on the year. So that offensive line for Georgia has to play great. They need to establish the run early. They need to keep pressure off of Carson Beck's shoulders. And Carson Beck, when he does drop back, needs to make better decisions. Biggest storyline on Ole Miss's side, though, Blake, before you jump in here, Lane's got to call his best game. Lane, every single time they step into premier matchups, last year against Georgia, against Alabama, this year against LSU, play calling's not been as good as it's supposed to be. They do not seem as prepared as they should. They seem sloppy in all of these big matchups. And that, to me, is the biggest driving force in this, is can Lane get his guys ready when he has failed to do so in many opportunities since being at Ole Miss?
What's going to be the status of Trey Harris? I have no idea. So to your point, I don't – when I talk about this on a Monday, I don't know this. If he goes or if he doesn't go, regardless to me, Joe, there's an underlying weakness in all of this. And it has nothing to do with anybody besides Carson Beck. Nobody. Joe, I don't care what anybody on the here's how I truly feel at the current moment. Now, Georgia fans, you feel this, okay? But from a national landscape, because they're winning, I don't think we're talking about this enough. Joe, again, the last three times, or at least last two times that I've seen Carson Beck, he has 6 picks. Now, he's gotten better in both second halves when the game slowed down. But regardless of whose fault it is, even if you take Carson Beck out of the equation and say it's all play calling, which is not true, but even if you did, Joe, they're turning the ball over way too much. And if Georgia doesn't turn the ball over, you're right. Like what we saw last week, they can assert dominance defensively. They're still one of the best defenses in the country. Just look at what they're doing the last couple of weeks. The bottom line, though, is, Joe, if you take both labels off of this, and I told you, regardless of the team, you know for a fact that the last 3 games that you've played, you have 8 total turnovers. Joe, you would come out here and say, regardless of who that is, you're turning the ball over way too much. I get what you're saying. And their defense is going to keep them in any game, regardless if that continues to go on. The problem is, I'm halfway through the season, and you said establish the run. Joe, it's not in their DNA right now. As a team.
Wait, but it can be, and this is why I'm getting so freaking frustrated about this.
No, if they ran for over 150 yards in this game against that defensive line, what they would have done in the realm of you went up against that front seven that's second in the country in run defense, you would have done something abnormal. Right? Because they're not running. So they're 97th in the country in rush yards. 97th. So I'm halfway through a season. I can come out here and continue to say, establish the run, establish the run. They're not doing it. They refuse in some instances to do it. It's the biggest complaint about what people are talking about with Bobo. Okay, oh, well, you got this problem and that problem. No, you're Georgia. Line up and bust them in the mouth. That's what you should be doing. But they're not. I'm over halfway of a season, and they can't establish it. I am not saying Georgia's losing this.
But hold on. It's not that they can't establish it. It's they're choosing not to.
Regardless. Okay. That's literally how I opened up all of this. Regardless of how, they want to, they can't. They can't. You think they're going to find it against Ole Miss?
It's not a matter of finding it. Again, they're choosing not to. They're one of the lowest teams in rush play percentage for the amount for the plays that they're calling. There's numbers.
Regardless, from a schematical standpoint or actually doing it standpoint, that any way that you talk about this, that they figure it out. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Wait, but why though? There's no reason behind it not happening. All it comes down to is Bobo first and second down to stop throwing the freaking ball. Going up against
the best team in the SEC in defending the run.
Look,
that's how I know.
Ole Miss has a very talented front seven. Like, there's a lot of guys that are going to get NFL opportunities. I was texting with a buddy about Chris Paul Jr., who is maybe the best linebacker in the SEC that doesn't get enough recognition and love for how great he's played this season. But we also have to contextualize that number, the rush yards per game that they're allowing, who they've gone up against. They went up against South Carolina's offensive line, which is terrible, and they feasted on them. They went up against LSU, who chooses not to run in their own right. And they went up against Oklahoma, who has had no life at all on offense. And then Arkansas was an impressive performance that they had. That I will give credit for. All I'm just trying to say here is that's a really good run defense, but there's no reason to believe stepping into this matchup that Georgia won't be able to find success running the football. They got Tate Ratledge back. Their offensive line can be good and can pay.
So what's their excuse about not running the ball effectively against Florida?
They chose not to. They had 40 passing attempts.
So listen to what I'm saying. Listen.
I am.
To what I'm saying. Okay, you are right. Regardless if they want to or if they don't do it at all. But either Bobo's not going to call it enough or they're not going to be able to establish it. Either way, he has not shown you. It would still be out of the norm. It'd still be out of the norm. And I promise you this. If you continue to look and do some of the things that you're doing offensively, this is how you're going to get clipped. From an on-scale coaching player aspect, they should win this football game, regardless of where it is. But the bottom line is, when you have teams turning the ball over and can't run, whether you want to or not want to, I don't care what it is, you're not running the football effectively, regardless. That is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for disaster. It's how you get clipped. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay.
If Ole Miss clips them, it's because of Jackson Dart is better than Carson Beck right now.
Well, right. And to move past this yelling at each other here, that is where the game is won. Is if Jackson Dart has played phenomenally. Like, there is no inflation in his stats. Jackson Dart has played fantastic to this part of the year. I said, and a lot of people were criticizing the way that he played against Kentucky. He wasn't the reason why they lost. He played a good game. They chose not to run the football, and he was going up against the defense that was just dropping everybody into coverage, and he had to sit and roam and try to find somebody to throw the football to. He has been fantastic this year, especially statistically with some of the big plays that he's had in these games, and we saw what he did against Arkansas last week. We know that Jackson Dart's the better decision maker between the two. It's just a matter of how often is Carson Beck being placed in these situations? How often is he placed in third and long? How often is he placed in spots where he has to make the big play? And we know that at the current moment, more often than not, he's messing up. He is making bad, brutal decisions. Ole Miss wins this game by making big plays, by getting sacks, by putting Georgia in these really tough, stressful inflection points where they have to call on Carson Beck to make the plays. And it's part of, not to rehash, I'm just putting this in here. It's part of what I have talked about with Bobo is that he's putting him in these situations when he doesn't have to. He's asking him to drop back and attack downfield past the sticks, and he doesn't have to. To move past that, if Georgia can manufacture him having to on third and medium, third and long, make plays, they win the football game.
You're a quarterback apologist.
I'm not a quarterback apologist.
The problem with your logic at the current moment, okay, if this were anybody besides Ole Miss, I'd probably agree with you on some of the things that you're talking about. I actually do agree with you. Ole Miss is 91st in the country in passing yards allowed. Seeing them up close and personal a couple of weeks ago, Joe, their secondary is very bad. It can be exploited. I understand what you're saying and actually fundamentally agree with what you're saying. I don't know if this is the week to go away from what potentially Bobo's plan is, right? Like, Joe, I mean, Garrett Nussmeier doesn't throw those 2 interceptions and make boneheaded decisions. I mean, Georgia can find ways to attack them through the air. It's not like it's just LSU. Like, I look at what they've done. They had a great win last week. Can't take it away from them. Again, that secondary is very leaky. And if you do call a game like Bobo, I can see where things can happen. Again, you're giving up too many yards if you're that secondary of Ole Miss. To your point about the first thing in reference to Jackson Dart playing well, we're not talking about him not having a running game, right? We've talked about Beck. We've talked about Nussmeier. We've talked about at times who's the what's his name at Arkansas? Taylon Green. We've talked about Nico, okay, and some of the issues that he's had with drops. Everybody's gotten the excuse besides Jackson Dart, and he's been consistent pretty much every week. I mean, really and truthfully, probably he's playing the most consistent in the SEC right now, if we're just calling all things considered, because he's not turning the ball over. He's doing what he's doing, throwing the football. He's been highly consistent. So
has there been let me ask you this question. Jackson Dart, do you think he's been the best quarterback in the SEC this season?
Tough question, because when you say that, people are like, "Oh, there's no way," and I'm like, "Then who
would put over him?"
Yeah, who is at the current moment? I mean, maybe he's Milroe, because again, people don't realize how big these turnovers are at the current moment, right? Like, I mean, let's just be real with Nussmeier and Beck and Green. Like, they're freak athletes. They do good things, but I mean, come on. So, look. I agree with your game plan. I just in reference to the game, I would tell Beck I'd let him have it again, because if there's one weakness that they have as a team, it's being leaky in the secondary.
That's fair. I want to just reiterate something that we didn't really spend a ton of time talking about, and I don't know about you, but for me, what Georgia's biggest strength in this situation, biggest advantage, 1,000% has to be coaching staff. And like, that's not a hot take. That's not some original thing.
Yeah.
Lane Kiffin has continued to fail in these situations. If he comes out, like, Kentucky's the perfect example this year, outside of what I brought up earlier, LSU. The game plan was terrible. His in-game coaching was horrible. He overcoaches sometimes in his head. He's a brilliant coach. I will never say that Lane Kiffin's a bad coach. He overcoaches. He overthinks things way too much. For me, another big part of this is like, will he do that again? And if he does, I mean, they're cooked. It's going to be just like last year.
Yeah, I mean, for Lane, you would like to see him not press as much. The only thing, though, Joe, is it is interesting because Lane's back is very much up against the corner right now, right? From a perception standpoint, from a team standpoint. Joe, they lose this game, they're out of the playoff. And it's why I feel that Georgia's going to win this game. Like, I do. Okay, and I want to make this very well known. I don't like this situation Georgia's in right now. I don't. Because when I look at Ole Miss, this isn't your grandpappy's Ole Miss. This isn't your daddy's Ole Miss. They have dudes defensively. Yeah. And they're good enough offensively, Joe, that if you're right, if Lane doesn't press, they're going to pop them. Okay? And Georgia fans are going to get pissed. And listen, I need to see you play turnover-free football. It's what I need to see. Because, Joe, until then, I think they're too vulnerable. But the problem that I have in saying that is that I look at them defensively like, all right, they figured something out. Something's there. Can they keep Carson Beck upright is a big question mark too, Joe. I don't think that Georgia tackle position is as good as what we saw or Ole Miss saw when they didn't have a second against LSU. We'll just have to wait and see here. But I'm going to pick Georgia. I just think, Joe, that finally Carson Beck finds something in the second half against Ole Miss, and that secondary is just too bad for Ole Miss right now to give Georgia the win here. Yeah, and just to repeat what I mentioned earlier, close margins here. Like, this is a very evenly matched game. I know Georgia fans might not want to hear that or be told that they're close with a team like Ole Miss, but very close margins. You're going on the road and you're dealing with a situation where your quarterback's been turning the ball over a ton.
This game is very evenly matched. It's 50-50 down the middle. I think it could go either way. And in a situation like that, you have to go with the team with the better coaching staff. We literally watched it happen this past week with an almost identical situation, except for Kirby Smart's far more decorated and successful than Ryan Day is. So there's even more reason to lean on Georgia in the situation. And the final part is something that we talked about going into the Texas game, Blake. I don't know what it is with these. When we preview Georgia, you and I yell at each other so much. I'm remembering, Mac, you and I screaming at each other during that Georgia-Texas preview. But when we talked about that preview, part of what I brought up was Kirby's too good of a coach to let the bad game against Alabama leak into other weeks against their biggest games on the schedule. He's just too good of a coach.
There right now, not with this team. I cannot go there because
but Carson Beck played like ass. He played like ass against Texas, and their defense won them the football game. Ole Miss's offensive line is worse than Texas's.
That's fine. Okay, defensively, that's the issue. You're right. The defense has stepped up to the plate. But Joe, it mind boggles me sometimes. Maybe I'm too much and putting too much emphasis on turnovers. Maybe
turnovers are important. Turnovers are important to talk about.
You're going to get clipped by somebody. You shouldn't get clipped by if you keep doing it. That's all I'm saying.
I get that.
100% it's going to happen. I don't care where it is.
I get that. And the reason why you and the difference in our opinions on why we're arguing on this so much is that the game doesn't live and die based on how Carson Beck plays. Because we've seen multiple times this year where he's had multiple interceptions.
It does against a team,
and they've still won.
But it does against a team like this. Because here's the thing.
Texas is better than Ole Miss, and they went on the road and beat Texas.
You're 1,000% sure about that?
Yes, I am 1,000% sure about that.
Jackson Dart over Quinn Ewers any day of the week and twice on Saturday.
Oh, I agree with that part, but
okay. I mean, where's Texas better than them defensively at the current moment?
In the secondary.
Okay. But they're not better in their front seven.
They're not better on their defensive line. I think that Texas is better at linebacker. They're better at safety, and they're better at corner. And they can't be better at D-line because the Texas D-line is very young. Both teams don't have a good run game. Both have underperforming offensive lines. I mean, they're similar.
I mean, Ole Miss is still second in the country in total offense. It's not like, I mean, and we're talking about them being, hold on for just a second. We're talking about Ole Miss being bad for just a moment. They're still second in total offense.
That's the word. We didn't say they were bad. I don't want to hear any Ole Miss fans claim
just clarify, because I mean,
no.
I think Ole Miss has been much more competitive throughout the year than Texas.
They have been, but I would argue that Ole Miss has played a far easier schedule to this point compared to most SEC teams.
No, they haven't.
The only hard team that Ole Miss has played so far this year is LSU. Texas has played Vanderbilt and Georgia, and Oklahoma's not a tough game, but
I don't know about that.
Their non-conference schedule so far this year has also been tougher because I understand that Michigan's a mess.
Coming into the SEC, got Mississippi State, Vandy, and Georgia. So outside of the Georgia game, they got two. When you come into the season, I mean, come on.
Ole Miss has played basically the same. We're wasting too much time on this because we got to get to the other previews. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.